The Chola dynasty was a Tamil thalassocratic empire of southern India, one of the longest ruling dynasties in the world's history. The earliest datable references to the Chola are in inscriptions from the 3rd century BCE left by Ashoka, of the Maurya Empire. As one of the 3 crowned kings of Tamilakam, along with the Chera and Pandya, the dynasty continued to govern over varying territory until the 13th century CE. Despite these ancient origins, the period when it is appropriate to speak of a Chola empire only begins with the medieval Cholas in the mid-9th century CE. The heartland of the Cholas was the fertile valley of the Kaveri River, but they ruled a significantly larger area at the height of their power from the later half of the 9th century till the beginning of the 13th century. The whole country south of the Tungabhadra was united and held as one state for a period of 3 centuries and more between 907 and 1215 AD. Under Rajaraja Chola I and his successors Rajendra Chola I, Rajaraja Chola, Bhararendra Chola, and Kulothunga Chola I, the dynasty became a military, economic and cultural power in South Asia and Southeast Asia. The power of the new empire was proclaimed to the Eastern world by the expedition to the Ganges which Rajendra Chola I undertook and by naval raids on cities of the city-state of Srivijaya, as well as by the repeated embassies to China. The Chola fleet represented the zenith of ancient Indian sea power. During the period 1010 to 1153, the Chola territories stretched from the islands of the Maldives in the south to as far north as the banks of the Godavari River in Andhra Pradesh. Rajaraja Chola conquered peninsular South India, annexed parts of which is now Sri Lanka and occupied the islands of the Maldives. Rajendra Chola sent a victorious expedition to North India that touched the river Ganges and defeated the Pula ruler of Pataliputra, Mahipala. In 1025, he also successfully invaded cities of Srivijaya of Malaysia and Indonesia. Chola invasion ultimately failed to install direct administration over Srivijaya, since the invasion was short and only meant to plunder the wealth of Srivijaya. Chola rule or influence on Srivijaya would last until 1070 when the Cholas began to lose almost all of its overseas territories. The later Cholas would still rule portions of southern India and almost all of Sri Lanka. The Chola dynasty went into decline at the beginning of the 13th century with the rise of the Pandyan dynasty, which ultimately caused their downfall. The Cholas left a lasting legacy. Their patronage of Tamil literature and their zeal in the building of temples has resulted in some great works of Tamil literature and architecture. The Chola kings were avid builders and envisioned the temples in their kingdoms not only as places of worship but also as centers of economic activity. They were also well known for their art, specifically temple sculptures and Chola bronzes, exquisite bronze sculptures of Hindu deities built in a lost wax process they pioneered, that continues to this day. They established a centralized form of government and a disciplined bureaucracy. The Chola school of art spread to Southeast Asia and influenced the architecture and art of Southeast Asia. The medieval Cholas are best known for the construction of the magnificent Brihadisvara temple at Tanjavur, commissioned by the most famous Chola king, Rajaraja Chola in 1010 CE. Origins. The Cholas are also known as the Chota. Its antiquity is evident from the mentions in ancient Tamil literature and in inscriptions. Later medieval Cholas also claimed a long and ancient lineage. Mentions in the early Sangam literature indicate that the earliest kings of the dynasty antedated 100 CE. Cholas were mentioned in Ashokan edicts of 3rd century BCE as one of the neighboring countries existing in the south. There is very little written evidence available of the Cholas prior to the 7th century. Historic records exist thereafter, including inscriptions on temples. During the past 150 years, historians have gleaned significant knowledge on the subject from a variety of sources such as ancient Tamil Sangam literature, oral traditions, religious texts, temple and copperplate inscriptions. The main source for the available information of the early Cholas is the early Tamil literature of the Sangam period. There are also brief notices on the Chola country and its towns, ports and commerce furnished by the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, and in the slightly later work of the geographer Ptolemy. Mahavamsa, a Buddhist text written down during the 5th century CE, recounts a number of conflicts between the inhabitants of Ceylon and Cholas in the 1st century BCE. Cholas are mentioned in the Pillars of Ashoka inscriptions, where they are mentioned among the kingdoms which, though not subject to Ashoka, were on friendly terms with him. A commonly held view is that Chola is, like Chera and Pandya, the name of the ruling family or clan of immemorial antiquity. The annotator Paramelizgar said, the charity of people with ancient lineage are forever generous in spite of their reduced means. Other names in common use for the Cholas are Kili, Vallabhan, Sembian and Seni. Kili perhaps comes from the Tamil kil meaning dig or cleave and conveys the idea of a digger or a worker of the land. This word often forms an integral part of early Chola names like Nunkali, Nailankili and so on, but almost drops out of use in later times. Vallabhan is most probably connected with Valam, fertility and means owner or ruler of a fertile country. Sembian is generally taken to mean a descendant of Shibi, a legendary hero whose self-sacrifice in saving a dove from the pursuit of a falcon figures among the early Chola legends and forms the subject matter of the Sibi Jataka among the Jataka stories of Buddhism. In Tamil lexicon, Chola means Sozi or Saya, denoting a newly formed kingdom, in the lines of Pandya or the Old Country. Seni in Tamil means head. History. The history of the Cholas falls into four periods: the early Cholas of the Sangam literature, the interregnum between the fall of the Sangam Cholas and the rise of the imperial medieval Cholas under Vijayalaya, the dynasty of Vijayalaya, and finally the later Chola dynasty of Kulothunga Chola I from the third quarter of the 11th century. Early Cholas. The earliest Chola kings for whom there is tangible evidence are mentioned in the Sangam literature. Scholars generally agree that this literature belongs to the late centuries before the Common Era and the early centuries of the Common Era. The internal chronology of this literature is still far from settled, and at present a connected account of the history of the period cannot be derived. It records the names of the kings and the princes, and of the poets who extolled them. The Sangam literature also records legends about mythical Chola kings. These myths speak of the Chola king Kantaman, a supposed contemporary of the sage Agastya, whose devotion brought the river Kaveri into existence. Two names are prominent among those Chola kings known to have existed who feature in Sangam literature: Karikala Chola and Kasanganan. There are no sure means of settling the order of succession, of fixing their relations with one another and with many other princelings of around the same period. Oriyur was their oldest capital. Kavaraipatinam also served as an early Chola capital. The Mahavamsa mentions that an ethnic Tamil adventurer, a Chola prince known as Elalan, invaded the island Sri Lanka and conquered it around 235 BCE with the help of a Mysore army. Interregnum. There is not much information about the transition period of around 3 centuries from the end of the Sangam age to that in which the Pandyas and Pallavas dominated the Tamil country. An obscure dynasty, the Kalabras, invaded Tamil country, displaced the existing kingdoms and ruled during that time. They were displaced by the Pallava dynasty and the Pandyan dynasty in the 6th century. Little is known of the fate of the Cholas during the succeeding 3 centuries until the accession of Vijayalaya in the 2nd quarter of the 9th century. As per inscriptions found in and around Tanjavur, the kingdom was ruled by Mathurayars, Mathurajas, for 3 centuries. Their reign was ended by Vijayalaya Chola, who captured Tanjavur from Ilango Mathurayar between 848 to 851 CE. Epigraphy and literature provide few glimpses of the transformations that came over this line of kings during this long interval. It is certain that when the power of the Cholas fell to its lowest ebb and that of the Pandyas and Pallavas rose to the north and south of them, this dynasty was compelled to seek refuge and patronage under their more successful rivals. The Cholas continued to rule over a diminished territory in the neighborhood of Uraiyur, but only in a minor capacity. In spite of their reduced powers, the Pandyas and Pallavas accepted Chola princesses in marriage, possibly out of regard for their reputation. Numerous Pallava inscriptions of this period mention their having fought rulers of the Chola country. Despite this loss in influence and power, it is unlikely that the Cholas lost total grip of the territory around Uraiyur, their old capital, as Vijayalaya, when he rose to prominence, hailed from that area. Around the 7th century, a Chola kingdom flourished in present-day Andhra Pradesh. These Telugu Cholas traced their descent to the early Sangam Cholas. However, it is not known if they had any relation to the early Cholas. It is possible that a branch of the Tamil Cholas migrated north during the time of the Pallavas to establish a kingdom of their own, away from the dominating influences of the Pandyas and Pallavas. The Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, who spent several months in Kanchipuram during 639 to 640, writes about the kingdom of Kilaya, in an apparent reference to these Telugu Cholas. Imperial Cholas. Vijayalaya was the founder of the imperial Chola dynasty, which was the beginning of one of the most splendid empires in Indian history. Vijayalaya, possibly a feudatory of the Pallava dynasty, took an opportunity arising out of a conflict between the Pandya dynasty and Pallava dynasty in circa 850, captured Tanjavur from Madurayar, and established the imperial line of the medieval Chola dynasty. Tanjavur became the capital of the imperial Chola dynasty. The Chola dynasty was at the peak of its influence and power during the medieval period. Through their leadership and vision, Chola kings expanded their territory and influence. The second Chola king, Aditya I, caused the demise of the Pallava dynasty and defeated the Pandyan dynasty of Madurai in 885, occupied large parts of the Kannada country, and had marital ties with the Western Ganga dynasty. In 925, his son Parantaka I conquered Sri Lanka. Parantaka I also defeated the Rashtrakuta dynasty under Krishna II in the Battle of Vyala. Rajaraja Chola I and Rajendra Chola I were the greatest rulers of the Chola dynasty, extending it beyond the traditional limits of a Tamil kingdom. At its peak, the Chola Empire stretched from the island of Sri Lanka in the south to the Godavari Krishna River basin in the north, up to the Konkan coast in Bhatkal, the entire Malabar coast in addition to Lakshadweep, and Maldives. Rajaraja Chola I was a ruler with inexhaustible energy, and he applied himself to the task of governance with the same zeal that he had shown in waging wars. He integrated his empire into a tight administrative grid under royal control, and at the same time strengthened local self-government. Therefore, he conducted a land survey in 1000 CE to effectively marshal the resources of his empire. He also built the Brihadiswarar temple in 1010 CE. Rajendra Chola I conquered Odisha and his armies continued to march further north and defeated the forces of the Pala dynasty of Bengal and reached the Ganges River in North India. Rajendra Chola I built a new capital called Gangaikonda Kalapuram to celebrate his victories in northern India. Rajendra Chola I successfully invaded the Srivijaya kingdom in Southeast Asia, which led to the decline of the empire there. This expedition had such a great impression to the Malay people of the medieval period that his name was mentioned in the corrupted form as Raja Chulan in the medieval Malay chronicle Sehara Melayu. He also completed the conquest of the island of Sri Lanka and took the Sinhala king Mahinda V as a prisoner, in addition to his conquests of Ratapati and Kannada country. Rajendra's territories included the area falling on the Ganges Hooghly Damodar basin, as well as Sri Lanka and Maldives. The kingdoms along the east coast of India up to the river Ganges acknowledged Chola's suzerainty. 3 diplomatic missions were sent to China in 1016, 1033, and 1077. The Western Chalukya Empire under Satyashraya and Samshvara I tried to wriggle out of Chola domination from time to time, primarily due to the Chola influence in the Vengi kingdom. The Western Chalukyas mounted several unsuccessful attempts to engage the Chola emperors in war, and except for a brief occupation of Vengi territories between 1118 to 1126, all their other attempts ended in failure, with successive Chola emperors routing the armies of the Chalukyas at various places in many wars. Bararayendra Chola defeated Samshvara II of the Western Chalukya Empire and made an alliance with Prince Vikramaditya VI. Cholas always successfully controlled the Chalukyas in the western Deccan by defeating them in war and levying tribute on them. Even under the emperors of the Cholas like Kulothunga I and Vikrama Chola, the wars against the Chalukyas were mainly fought in Chalukya territories in Karnataka or in the Telugu country like Vengi, Kakinada, Anantapur, or Gudi. Then the former feudatories like the Hoysalas, Yadvas, and Kakatiyas steadily increased their power and finally replaced the Chalukyas. With the occupation of Dharwar in north-central Karnataka by the Hoysalas under Vishnuvardhana, where he based himself with his son Narasimha I in charge at the Hoysala capital Dwarasamudra around 1149, and with the Kalasharis occupying the Chalukyan capital for over 35 years from around 1150 to 1151, the Chalukya kingdom was already starting to dissolve. The Cholas under Kulothunga Chola III collaborated to herald the dissolution of the Chalukyas by aiding Hoysalas under Veerabalala II, the son-in-law of the Chola monarch, and defeated the Western Chalukyas in a series of wars with Samshvara IV between 1185 to 1190. The last Chalukya king's territories did not even include the erstwhile Chalukyan capitals Badami, Manikedha or Kalyani. That was the final dissolution of Chalukyan power, though the Chalukyas existed only in name since 1135 to 1140. But the Cholas remained stable until 1215, were absorbed by the Pandyan Empire and ceased to exist by 1279. On the other hand, throughout the period from 1150 to 1280, the staunchest opponents of the Cholas were Pandya princes who tried to win independence for their traditional territories. This period saw constant warfare between the Cholas and the Pandyas. The Cholas also fought regular wars with the eastern Gangas of Kalinga, protected Vengi though it remained largely independent under Chola control, and had domination of the entire eastern coast with their feudatories the Telugu Cholas, Velananti Cholas, Renandu Cholas etc., who also always aided the Cholas in their successful campaigns against the Chalukyas and levying tribute on the Kannada kingdoms, and fought constantly with the Sinhalas, who attempted to overthrow the Chola occupation of Lanka, but until the time of the later Chola king Kulatunga I the Cholas had firm control over Lanka. A later Chola king, Rajadiraja Chola II, was strong enough to prevail over a confederation of 5 Pandya princes who were aided by their traditional friend, the king of Lanka. This once again gave control of Lanka to the Cholas despite the fact that they were not strong under the resolute Rajadiraja Chola II. However, his successor, the last great Chola monarch Kulatunga Chola III, reinforced the hold of the Cholas by quelling rebellion and disturbances in Lanka and Madurai, defeated Hoysala generals under Veerabalala II in Karuvur, in addition to holding onto his traditional territories in Tamil country, eastern Gangavati, Draksharama, Vengi, and Kalinga. After this, he entered into a marital alliance with Veerabalala II, and his relationship with Hoysalas seems to have become friendlier. Overseas conquests. During the reign of Rajaraja Chola I and his successors Rajendra Chola I, Viraryendra Chola and Kulothunga Chola I, the Chola armies invaded Sri Lanka, the Maldives and parts of Southeast Asia like Malaysia, Indonesia and southern Thailand of the Srivijaya Empire in the 11th century. Rajaraja Chola I launched several naval campaigns that resulted in the capture of Sri Lanka, Maldives and the Malabar coast. In 1025, Rajendra Chola launched naval raids on ports of Srivijaya and against the Burmese kingdom of Pegu. A Chola inscription states that he captured or plundered 14 places, which have been identified with Palembang, Tambralinga and Kedah among others. A second invasion was led by Viraryendra Chola, who conquered Kedah in Malaysia of Srivijaya in the late 11th century. Chola invasion ultimately failed to install direct administration over Srivijaya, since the invasion was short and only meant to plunder the wealth of Srivijaya. However, this invasion gravely weakened the Srivijayan hegemony and enabled the formation of regional kingdoms. Although the invasion was not followed by direct Cholan occupation and the region was unchanged geographically, there were huge consequences in trade. Tamil traders encroached on the Srivijayan realm traditionally controlled by Malay traders, and the Tamil guild's influence increased on the Malay peninsula and north coast of Sumatra. Later Cholas. Marital and political alliances between the eastern Chalukyas began during the reign of Rajaraja following his invasion of Vengi. Rajaraja Chola's daughter married Chalukya prince Vimaladitya, and Rajendra Chola's daughter Amanga Devi was married to the eastern Chalukya prince Rajaraja Narendra. Viraryendra Chola's son, Athurayendra Chola, was assassinated in a civil disturbance in 1070, and Kulothunga Chola I, the son of Amanga Devi and Rajaraja Narendra, ascended the Chola throne. Thus began the later Chola dynasty. The later Chola dynasty was led by capable rulers such as Kulothunga Chola I, his son Vikrama Chola, other successors like Rajaraja Chola II, Rajadiraja Chola II, and Kulothunga Chola III, who conquered Kalinga, Elam, and Kataha. However, the rule of the later Cholas between 1218, starting with Rajaraja Chola II, to the last emperor Rajendra Chola III was not as strong as those of the emperors between 850 to 1215. Around 1118, they lost control of Vengi to the western Chalukya and Gangavati to the Hoysala Empire. However, these were only temporary setbacks, because immediately following the accession of King Vikrama Chola, the son and successor of Kulothunga Chola I, the Cholas lost no time in recovering the province of Vengi by defeating Chalukya Someshvara III and also recovering Gangavati from the Hoysalas. The Chola Empire, though not as strong as between 850 to 1150, was still largely territorially intact under Rajaraja Chola II, a fact attested by the construction and completion of the third grand Chola architectural marvel, the chariot-shaped Aravadesvara temple at Dharasuram on the outskirts of modern Kumbakonam. Chola administration and territorial integrity until the rule of Kulothunga Chola III was stable and very prosperous up to 1215, but during his rule itself, the decline of the Chola power started following his defeat by Maravarman Sundara Pandian II in 1215-16. Subsequently, the Cholas also lost control of the island of Lanka and were driven out by the revival of Sinhala power, in continuation of the decline, also marked by the resurgence of the Pandyan dynasty as the most powerful rulers in South India. A lack of a controlling central administration in its erstwhile Pandyan territories prompted a number of claimants to the Pandya throne to cause a civil war in which the Sinhalas and the Cholas were involved by proxy. Details of the Pandyan civil war and the role played by the Cholas and Sinhalas are present in the Mahavamsa as well as the Palavarayan Petai inscriptions. Decline. The Cholas, under Rajaraja Chola III and later, his successor Rajendra Chola III, were quite weak and therefore experienced continuous trouble. One feudatory, the Kadava chieftain Kaparanchinga I, even held Rajaraja Chola III as hostage for some time. At the close of the 12th century, the growing influence of the Hoysalas replaced the declining Chalukyas as the main player in the Kannada country, but they too faced constant trouble from the Sunas and the Kalachuris, who were occupying Chalukya capital because those empires were their new rivals. So naturally, the Hoysalas found it convenient to have friendly relations with the Cholas from the time of Kulothunga Chola III, who had defeated Hoysala Veera Ballala II, who had subsequent marital relations with the Chola monarch. This continued during the time of Rajaraja Chola III, the son and successor of Kulothunga Chola III. The Hoysalas played a divisive role in the politics of the Tamil country during this period. They thoroughly exploited the lack of unity among the Tamil kingdoms and alternately supported one Tamil kingdom against the other, thereby preventing both the Cholas and Pandyas from rising to their full potential. During the period of Rajaraja III, the Hoysalas sided with the Cholas and defeated the Kadava chieftain Kaparunjinga and the Pandyas and established a presence in the Tamil country. Rajendra Chola III, who succeeded Rajaraja III, was a much better ruler who took bold steps to revive the Chola fortunes. He led successful expeditions to the north as attested by his epigraphs found as far as Kadapa. He also defeated two Pandya princes, one of whom was Maravarman Sundara Pandya II, and briefly made the Pandyas submit to the Chola overlordship. The Hoysalas, under Veera Samswara, were quick to intervene, and this time they sided with the Pandyas and repulsed the Cholas in order to counter the latter's revival. The Pandyas in the south had risen to the rank of a great power who ultimately banished the Hoysalas from Malenadu or Kannada country, who were allies of the Cholas from Tamil country, and the demise of the Cholas themselves ultimately was caused by the Pandyas in 1279. The Pandyas first steadily gained control of the Tamil country as well as territories in Sri Lanka, southern Chera country, Telugu country under Maravarman Sundara Pandian II and his able successor Jadavarman Sundara Pandian before inflicting several defeats on the joint forces of the Cholas under Rajaraja Chola III, and the Hoysalas under Samshwara. His son Ramanatha. The Pandyans gradually became major players in the Tamil country from 1215 and intelligently consolidated their position in Madurai Ramaswaram Elam southern Chera country and Kanyakumari belt, and had been steadily increasing their territories in the Kaveri belt between Dindigul Tiruchikara or Satyamangalam as well as in the Kaveri delta, i.e., Tanjavur Mayoram Chidambaram Vridachalam Kunchi, finally marching all the way up to Arcot, Tirumalai Nellore Viziawadai Venji Kalingam belt by 1250. The Pandyas steadily routed both the Hoysalas and the Cholas. They also dispossessed the Hoysalas, by defeating them under Jadavarman Sundara Pandian at Kannur. At the close of Rajendra's reign, the Pandyan Empire was at the height of prosperity and had taken the place of the Chola Empire in the eyes of the foreign observers. The last recorded date of Rajendra III is 1279. There is no evidence that Rajendra was followed immediately by another Chola prince. The Hoysalas were routed from Kannur around 1279 by Kulaskara Pandian, and in the same war the last Chola emperor Rajendra III was routed and the Chola Empire ceased to exist thereafter. Thus the Chola Empire was completely overshadowed by the Pandyan Empire and sank into obscurity and ceased to exist by the end of the 13th century. However, only the Chola dynasty in India was extinguished, but it survived elsewhere. According to Cebuano oral legends, a rebel branch of the Chola dynasty continued to survive in the Philippines up until the 16th century, a local Malayo-Tamil Indianized kingdom called the Rajanate of Cebu, which settled in the island of Cebu, which was founded by Rajamuta Sri Lume, who was half Tamil, half Malay. He was born in the previously Chola-occupied Srivijaya. He was sent by the Maharaja to establish a base for expeditionary forces, but he rebelled and established his own independent Rajanate. The Indianized kingdom flourished until its eventual conquest by conquistador Miguel López de Legazpi, who with his Spanish and Latino soldiers had sailed to the Philippines from Mexico.